Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today for this Libraries for Digital Equity webinar. Our title today is Navigating Federal E-Rate Policy, and we're very excited to have guests from the Schools, Health, and Libraries Broadband Coalition, that's SHLB, and from Mission Telecom with us. So just a quick intro, this is hosted by Libraries for Digital Equity. Libraries for DE provides training, resources, news, and more for libraries that are working to close the digital divide. Everything that's on our website is free. It's available right now, so feel free to poke around. My name is Liz Gabbitas. I'm the managing director, and I am excited to be our host today. Okay, so on our agenda for today, we are going to start off with the two big things in E-rate land. We've got a Supreme Court case and we've got a Congressional Review Act. So we're going to start by talking about those things. And then we're going to talk about what else you can do, how you can still have a say in this landscape and what's going on right now. All that is going to be about 30 minutes. Then we're going to get into a 15-minute Q&A. We're hoping to have a real open discussion. So again, feel free to use the chat throughout this meeting. Once we get to the Q&A, you're also welcome to unmute and just speak up. So now we are going to introduce our speakers. We are really excited to have two fantastic people here today. We have Kristen Corra, who is the Policy Counsel with the Schools, Health, and Libraries Broadband Coalition. Kristen does fantastic work. SHLB does fantastic work. If you're not already a member, I would really encourage you to check them out. They do some fantastic stuff. I said that already. And we're excited to hear from Kristen. And then we also have Mark Colwell. Mark is the director of broadband operations at Mission Telecom, another fantastic group that does some fantastic work. We're going to hear more about Mark in just a minute. And okay, I said to use the chat all throughout this. Yeah, so let's go ahead and get into this. We're going to start with a little bit of background on E-rate. Oh, nope, we're going to start with background on SHLB. Kristen.
Thank you, Liz, so much. I'll be quick here. I know I saw a lot of familiar and friendly faces as you guys were popping on and talking in the chat. So I think a lot of you might already be familiar with SHLB, but if not, SHLB stands for the Schools, Health, and Libraries Broadband Coalition. We are a nonprofit organization. We're based out of Washington, D.C., and we are a membership organization, as Liz indicated previously. So, and anyone can join to be a member. So currently we have about over 300 members, and we are a little bit unique. Our members make up a wide variety of individuals and organizations within the broadband sphere. So for example, we have members that are part of community anchor institutions, so libraries and schools. But we also have members that are part of public interest groups and for-profit companies, you name it. We are mission driven. So our goal is to promote access to reliable, affordable broadband to anchor institutions and their communities. And so what are our day-to-day activities, you might ask? Well, we engage in broadband advocacy for anchor institutions. So we advocate mostly to the FCC and to Congress, but we also stay engaged around state issues as well. And really, we just sort of keep track of what's going on in the broadband policy space. We strategize where we can provide recommendations about policies, and we really try to bring a voice from those in the field, such as those in schools and libraries, up to the federal level to make sure that your voice is heard throughout whatever rules the FCC or Congress are considering. Okay, next slide. So Liz, I think you want to do a little bit of polling before we get into discussing E-rate.
Yeah, so let me launch. Here we go. Okay, there should be a poll popping up on your screen. If you can click a quick answer, that would be great. We'd love to just get a sense of where you are. So the question is, are you already using E-rate?
So we've got a pretty interesting even split there, Liz. So yes,
right.
Currently, no's, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thanks everyone. Appreciate you participating in that.
Awesome. Okay, well, good. I'm actually glad that there are some folks that are not currently using E-rate or maybe not familiar with E-rate. So hopefully this is helpful for you. So to understand E-rate, let's first understand the Universal Service Fund, or USF. You will hear us saying USF quite a bit. So just in order to give you guys context. So back in 1934, Congress created the Communications Act, and here they saw a need for all people in the US to have access to nationwide communication service at reasonable charges. So back then, the Universal Service Fund was really a mechanism that assessed fees from interstate long distance carriers to subsidize telephone service. And that was used to help low income households and high cost areas. Now, fast forward to 1996. You may have heard of the Telecommunications Act of 1996. This expanded universal service from nationwide telephone service to now include things like rural health care and schools and libraries. So today the USF supports 4 different programs. So we have the high cost program that supports telephone companies that serve high cost areas, Lifeline that assists low income customers by helping to pay for monthly telephone charges. We have rural health care that helps to provide support for rural health care providers to ensure that their rates for telecom services are similar to those rates provided in urban areas. And then of course, we also have the E-rate program. So what is E-rate? So E-rate provides telecommunications services, internet access, and internal connections to eligible schools and libraries. So E-rate, it's important to understand that it is a discount program. So schools and libraries themselves do not receive direct funding from the program, but they receive discounts on the cost of the services that they receive from vendors or providers. And so really here, the USF will compensate those vendors for the amount of the discount that the school or library is eligible to receive. Now, the amount of the discount that each school or library can receive ranges either from 20% all the way up to 90%. And this is determined using a very specific matrix. And so schools and libraries located in rural and low income areas will receive the highest discounts from the fund. So E-rate supports 2 eligible categories of service. So you may hear the buzzwords Category 1 and Category 2. Category 1 includes telecommunications services, internet access. Category 2 is more about the internal connections. So like think of hardware, cabling, basic maintenance, things like that. And then funding for E-rate is available based on demand. So in 2025, the annual cap for the E-rate program was about $5.06 billion. And if the demand exceeds the cap for a certain funding year, the USF funding will go to support the highest discounted schools and libraries first. Okay, go ahead to the next slide, Mark. All right, so let's get into a recent court case that many of you might be aware of by now. So this is a case called FCC v. Consumers Research. And so by way of background, the Universal Service Fund currently collects contributions from telecommunications companies. So basically there is a fee that is assessed on telecommunications companies to support broadband and telecom access for these different universal service fund programs. So each quarter, the FCC will set a contribution percentage. Basically, they're telling the companies, that are paying into the fund how much they will need to pay. So it's important to know that the amount that the FCC is raising here is not based off of a particular number. So Congress didn't tell the FCC, collect a certain dollar amount to pay, for these universal fund programs, but instead it's based off of demand. And that information is all collected by USAC, which is a third-party company. All of this information based off of who applies for the program is collected and it's publicly available. So that information is passed on to the FCC and that contribution factor is then created. So the legal challenge. So what was actually going on in this case? So there is a group called Consumers Research, and they were claiming that the Universal Service Fund is unconstitutional. So really they examined questions based about delegation of authority. So we were looking at a public delegation, non-delegation argument and a private non-delegation argument. So the public non-delegation argument was really the question hinged on, did Congress provide enough guidance to the FCC when it set up the statute relating to universal service in order for the FCC to be able to collect the funds in the way it does? And then the private non-delegation argument was, did the FCC have the authority to use USAC in the way that it's using USAC? So does the FCC oversee USAC, or is USAC sort of running its own show, essentially? SHLB was actually a named party to this lawsuit. And so myself, I got to sit in on the oral argument back in March, which was a really great experience in and of itself. And we actually had a decision that came out about a month ago, and it was a good one. So the outcome of the case, USF remains in place. We had a 6-3 decision. So the Supreme Court affirmed that the USF is constitutional. And basically it said that when Congress set up the parameters of the Universal Service Fund, it provided the FCC with clear, intelligible principles to help guide the FCC to determine how to collect that money and how to administer the programs. So this means that the FCC can continue to fund broadband for schools, libraries, healthcare clinics, and help rural communities. Now, the question does remain whether there might be future legal challenges related to the USF, but for now, this was extremely good news for many of us in this field.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the homework gap, which has been an issue that the FCC recently attempted to address via the E-rate program. So the homework gap refers to the overlap between students whose teachers assign them homework, but that do not have home internet access. So there's lots of stats we could look at around this topic, but the stats that I found from NEA, for example, 70% of teachers assign homework that requires internet access. And then when we look at broadband adoption rates, only 43%, actually 57% have internet, but 43, so 2 out of 5 homes that are in the lowest quintile of income, which would be $30,000 or less, they do not have home internet access, right? So that gap, those students are part of the homework gap. So another research paper from Education Week, for example, shows 24% of all low-income students can't complete homework because they simply don't have internet at home. So these are kids that then have to either go to the school parking lot, the fast food chain, the local library to get internet access to complete work. And those types of facilities aren't always open when the student needs to do the work. So that's the issue that's been illuminated, particularly around COVID, and continues to be an issue today. And another stat that I like to show, this is from a Common Sense Media study in 2020, right when COVID broke out. But this sort of shows you some of the disparities by geography, by race and ethnicity. You'll notice that Latinx, Black, Native American students have a higher percentage of them do not have adequate connectivity at home. Rural areas, of course, the focus of federal programs like BEAD and CPF, rural students have a higher level of inadequate connectivity. The thing that blows my mind on this one is around teachers. So this study at the time found that 400,000 teachers. So to give you perspective, there's 3.8 million K-12 teachers in the US. 1 out of 10 teachers in the United States at the time this was conducted did not have an adequate internet connection at home, which is pretty wild. I cannot imagine trying to lesson plan and grade papers and conduct all the things you need to do as a teacher without internet. But that was the reality when COVID broke out. So there were a lot of programs that tried to address this problem. And one of them is, an E-rate rulemaking. So I'm going to hand it back to Liz. We're going to do a little poll on hotspots now.
Okay, so I've just launched another poll. You should see it pop up. Do you check out hotspots? We're also asking other ways that you might provide internet services beyond your physical building. So if you're a library or a school or an organization that works with libraries beyond the building, are you checking out hotspots or otherwise providing connectivity? So we've got definitely a majority at yes or yes and interested in expanding, which is, I think, exciting.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for the input on that. Am I still sharing my screen? Can everyone see
You
the
are,
slides?
yep.
All right, cool. All right, I'm going to hand it, I think, back to Kristen Corra to tell us about E-rate hotspots and the FCC.
Perfect. Okay, well, that's really interesting. Okay, so we've got some interest in hotspots. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the FCC's hotspot lending program. So what is this? So last year, the FCC adopted this new program. And for a little bit of context here, what we saw, and Liz, I know we didn't ask this, but some folks on this call might be familiar with the ECF program, right? So really what we saw here was with the winding down of the ECF program, the FCC wanted to ensure that students and library patrons in need of internet at home could still access it, right? So the FCC opened up a new rulemaking to ask questions about, hey, should we add a new hotspot lending program that could be supported under E-rate? So a lot of parties weighed in. We saw a lot of people, stakeholders, including those in the library space, provide comment to the FCC and provide just their own expertise in lending hotspots and what this new program could look like. And so back in 2024, the FCC did adopt this hotspot lending program. So the program is funded by E-rate. And funding started this year for funding year 2025. And so this program is subject to all of your typical E-rate rules. So we have things like competitive bidding that are still required. You still have filtering requirements. And then there's also new rules that are related to the hotspots themselves. So one particular rule was around warehousing. The FCC really doesn't want a school or library to order a lot of hotspots to warehouse them. They want to make sure that these hotspots are being actively used. So there are a lot of requirements for both providers and for the applicants themselves to make sure that these hotspots are being used and that service is ongoing. Now, funding is also subject to a school or library's E-rate discount, like we talked about previously. And there's also caps on the amount of funding that you can actually receive for services and for the devices themselves. So I can put a link into the chat to the actual hotspot order if you would like to do a little bit of light reading, because I know there's a lot of questions around the program. So if you're interested in looking to see, what the different requirements are, we can give you some resources for that. Fast forward to now. So just a couple of stats here we've put up on the slide. Around 8,000 schools and libraries have applied, again, beginning with funding year 2025. Which equivocates to about 880,000 lines of service requested in their Form 470s. So a good amount of interest that we've seen so far for this year. Now, we would be remiss if we did not talk about the current risks to this particular program. So we have some, as you can see, some questions up here on the screen. So will Congress roll this program back via congressional resolution? So unfortunately, because of some very specific timing requirements that I am not going to go into, the hotspot program is subject to rollback via what we call the Congressional Review Act, or CRA. So this means that Congress has the ability to potentially terminate this program. And we've already seen the Senate voting on this item. They did vote yes to terminate the program. Now this resolution is sitting at the House. So so there is the potential for the House to take a vote on this item, and this would be extremely problematic for any future movement when it comes to hotspots, particularly under E-rate, because if Congress votes to roll back and terminate this program, it would actually prevent the FCC from proposing a similar program in the future. So that would be a really detrimental decision, especially for libraries who are interested in hotspot lending or who have used it and find it to be very useful to help connect communities. So we are currently in that state of, where it's sitting at the House. It's open until the end of this Congress. So the House has all the way until about the end of December 2026 to take a vote on this item. So, SHLB and others, we are pretty active right now with members of Congress, and our goal is, to bring libraries to meetings with different House members to really educate them on why hotspots are important and, what would happen if libraries did not have continued funding to support a hotspot program. And then also just other questions, would the FCC roll back this program on their own? We have a makeup of the agency itself. And so that could be a potential avenue if they want to roll it back on their own. It wouldn't be as detrimental as if Congress did it, but of course it would still, terminate the program, which would not be so positive. And then would there also be legal challenges, to this program? We've already seen some legal challenges brought in the Fifth Circuit about whether the FCC had statutory authority to fund hotspots within E-rate. Those were dismissed for procedural grounds, but again, is that something that could present itself in the future? We just don't know. Okay, so call to action, what can you do? So we know we don't want to just throw out all this information without providing any sort of, way that you can get involved if this is something that's important to you. So first and foremost, contact Congress. As I said, SHLB, this is where we're sitting at currently in trying to really tell Congress why it's important to have hotspot lending. And you all who are in the field, who are potentially using hotspots or who would want to use hotspots, your voice is extremely important in this discussion because they need to know how it would affect their specific districts and why it's important for the communities that they are supposed to be serving. I put a link here on the slide. SHLB has a webpage dedicated to the hotspot program. You can download who has applied, information about who has applied for the program for this year to see what districts are impacted the most. And then just leaning into advocacy opportunities generally. Again, your voice matters. So whether it's about hotspots or whether it's about some other aspect of broadband, digital opportunity, if you do training and all that, I always tell folks that it's really important to make sure that your voice is heard because you are already potentially doing this work. And so if you are gathering data and stories in a more formal way that can help push advocacy, you know what you need and how to ask for it. So making sure that you are at the table. and just participating however you can, however you are allowed. Here at Shelby, we do a lot of sign-on letters when it comes to certain topics. So if you're able to sign on and show support for an issue, that's always a good way to get involved. If there are Hill meetings or if there are fly-ins, again, participating in those events are important. And then just staying informed, if that's all that you can do at this point, that's always great as well. So organizations like Shelby, we provide things like conferences and webinars, and we have newsletters. And so making sure that you are really staying aware of what's going on, that's a really great first step.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen. And now, part of the promise of this webinar is thinking about what are some of the options outside of E-rate. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world, particularly in federal policy right now. So we're going to cover that now. So Mission Telecom is one of your options. So we're a nonprofit wireless broadband provider and grant-making foundation investing in a movement of systemic change. We have two programs. We have a broadband services program. I'm the director of that program. We have a social impact and philanthropy program where we give grants to the community. We have been feeling for our partners for some time now because we serve schools, libraries, nonprofits, and social welfare groups. I was compiling some notes that I have, but by my estimate, if you add up the Digital Equity Act, some of the education funding, the elimination of IMLS, and elimination of the Department of Ed, something like $9 billion is being withheld from these particular segments right now. So it's tough out there. I did see, the Department of Ed may be releasing some funding for after-school programs, but there's nearly $6 billion still being withheld. So it's tough. I think a lot of groups were planning on having grant funding available, and they've been sort of disrupted since the spring. So we've been really trying to step up and help out in any way we can. But for Mission Telecom, these are the only audiences we serve, right? School, library, nonprofit, social welfare. We don't sell to businesses. We don't sell to individuals. We're really designed to help meet this kind of need. And so while we would love to have as much federal funding out there for all of our partners, we're also, a stable organization due to our ability to we lease our spectrum assets to T-Mobile, for example, and we have funding that's in a private contract as opposed to federal funding. So that's the main message of this slide is, we feel for everyone out there, and so we're doing something about it. We provide a lot of different types of services: hotspots, laptops, tablets, fixed wireless internet, connected transportation for bookmobiles or activity vans, and BYOD. So any of those programs that were started during COVID, like ECF, we can send you a SIM card with our service on it. You can put it into an existing hotspot and you're ready to go. So anything essentially that can take a SIM card that's compatible on the T-Mobile network, because T-Mobile is our commercial partner, if you will. So what are we doing about it? We launched earlier this month a $7 a month or $84 per year for an unlimited rate plan. It can be on a 4G device. It can be on a 5G device. Our typical standard pricing is $20. The rate plan that we have is listed on the T-Mobile website for $60. So we're already at a pretty substantial discount on our standard pricing, but we're taking 65% off of that price. We're coming in at $84 just because we know there's a lot of programs that could be at risk without IMLS funding, without E-rate funding. And so you saw the stats on the homework app. You saw the stats on low-income families being able to access the internet at home. So we know there's a need there. So if you want to take a closer look at this particular offer, the link is in the chat. Please take a look at it and reach out to me or Matt Rocklovich, who's in the chat. And then I want to hand it back over to Liz for some other alternative ideas on how to sustain your program.
Yeah, so if you've started off with, like Kristen mentioned, the ECF Emergency Connectivity Fund earlier, if you've started off with a grant, which is how you got your hotspots in the first place, you had 100% coverage, and now you're getting to this point maybe where you're like, well, what do I do? So I am a big fan of the idea of graduated cost sharing. So this means that you are slowing or reducing the amount of costs that you are responsible for. And that can be either by pulling in another partner or another funding source, or it can be just on your own. And so as an example, say you had ECF funds, and say that maybe, there's been a few like local support grants, maybe state library grants that could give you a little bit of support, but again, it's limited. So if you were starting with 100% coverage from ECF, you're going to get into that, next year of coverage, or I guess it'd be our third year by fourth year. And that 100% is gone. But if you can get a portion of coverage from another grant, say 50%, then it's leaving your remaining, balance due, your costs at 50%. If you can build that idea into the structure of the structure of the grant in the first place, that is going to make you look more sustainable, more like you're thinking long term when you're putting in a grant application, when you're asking, say, a funder for donations. So you're coming to, say, an organization or a grantor, and you're saying, we would like this funding to cover 100% of our costs in the first year, and then only 25% of our costs in the second year. And here's this other organization that's going to give us 50% of our costs in the second year. So then the burden on your budget is only 25% of those costs. And so that shifts over time. The external support slowly decreases, and the amount that you are covering is slowly increasing. But one of the biggest benefits here is that you're covering it at the point when it's hardest to make a case for why this funding needs to be available in your budget. So now you can get through that most difficult period. You can pull your data, you can pull your stories, and you can say, look, here's the case for why this is so necessary and why we either need to increase our funding or pull in another external funder, or whatever the situation is. It just gives you a little bit of that wiggle room. You draw out the support a little bit longer. I know it's not a silver bullet, because that some of that support is still coming from your own budget, but it can help, and it can draw it out longer so that there's not an abrupt end of when you can offer these services. Another option, we can think outside the box. I know that we don't like slapping, business names all over the library, or, making it look like I don't know. I know that this is something that maybe we try to avoid, but I think that we can think outside the box and look at the way that we fundraise for buildings like capital projects, or look at the way that other successful projects, operations that need ongoing regular funding across the US and they're for the public good, the ways that they're successful in getting funding, like Adopt a Highway, right? Like, we're so familiar with Adopt a Highway. Why not, adopt a hotspot? You can approach social clubs, you can approach local businesses, scout troops, and say, hey, do you want to adopt a hotspot? The way that we do buy a brick campaigns for, facilities projects. How about like an internet brick, right? Your router or your hotspot, that's kind of a brick. And what about named sponsorships? Like, can you brand the case that a hotspot checks out on, or can you put a local business's flyer in the case in exchange for them being the named sponsor on it? Could you, say you're going to offer new 24/7 Wi-Fi in your parking lot? Could you put a sign in the parking lot that says, new 24/7 Wi-Fi brought to you by Mom's Grocery Store? I think that there's some ways to think a little beyond how we normally maybe like to offer our services. They're not perfect answers, but maybe it's something to kind of help us along. Mark? Oh, no, this is still me. Okay, a couple other things to help you along. These are some resources that are on our website, Libraries for DE. If you go to librariesforde.org/resources, you're going to find things like, we've got a template borrower agreement. So if, say you're pitching a hotspot program and your board is really worried about liability, there you go. There's a form. Download it, make some updates, start there. We've got other resources. There's actually one of my favorites is our Broadband Acronyms and Jargon Guide, which can really help with some of those tricky conversations. So check it out. Check out the resources we've got for you. They're all free. They're all available.
All right, I think I'll tag team this a little bit with Kristen on the key takeaways, but I think in general, the digital divide is persistent and it's not going away. the new thing that I'm hearing in this community is around, there's always a new technology and it's AI, right? The folks who never had internet access, they're probably not using AI and they're just getting further and further behind. And we've got to, be aware of that because it's going to be a challenge for students, for teachers, for folks who just won't have access. They're going to be perpetually behind. E-rate funding is, of course, a tool that can help provide broadband access both to the buildings, the anchors in your community, but also for the hotspot program, assuming Congress doesn't eliminate it. I'm going to steal Kristen's thunder here on the Universal Service Fund, but the good news is the Supreme Court came out the way we wanted it to, preserve the entire Universal Service Fund, but that doesn't mean some of the other programs are at risk. Kristen, why don't you take the last 3 bullet points on here?
Absolutely. Yep. So the FCC hotspot lending program is at risk of being overturned by Congress. So, really making your voice matter here is extremely important. Just if we continue to tell Congress why that would be a bad idea, that's where we're at right now. And any voices, any expertise and insight we can get on that subject would be extremely helpful. And then Mark, back to you, other solutions outside of E-rate.
Yeah, and so Mission Telecom is one of those solutions that we've rolled out a plan. $84 per year or $7 per month. Liz gave some great ideas on ways you can sustain your program. There's one thing I didn't mention I want to say, which is Kristen emphasized the rules around E-rate in terms of non-usage, paperwork, reimbursements. The good news about trying to sustain your program outside with a partner like Mission or any of the other low-cost providers is that there's no red tape, no paperwork, no reimbursement uncertainty that you have to worry about. So just keep that in mind that in some ways it's advantageous. The FCC is not going to come audit you 7 years from now for your hotspot program if you work through another solution. All right. Let's move to Q&A. The chat's open. Liz, you're the amazing webinar host. Why don't you take it back?
Okay, so we went a little long, but I'm so glad we did because Kristen and Mark both had fantastic information to share. So there were a couple of things that came up in the chat. I appreciated Michael mentioning earlier, asking about checking out other devices beyond hotspots, because we had that poll where we asked, what else are you doing for connectivity? And a couple folks mentioned Chromebooks and, embedded service, or like bundling a Chromebook with a hotspot or iPads. Kristen, I'm curious if you have any thoughts as far as if folks are looking at E-rate and thinking about things like, how does E-rate and using E-rate at our library tie in with being able to offer these other programs?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting point, a good point about embedded Chromebooks. So this was something that we were actually advocating for to the FCC when the FCC was doing its rulemaking around the hotspot program, because of cases like this where we have schools or libraries who have embedded Chromebooks, or if schools received embedded Chromebooks through ECF. And basically we were trying to make the case for, okay, hotspots themselves are great, but what about things like embedded service in a Chromebook? Could that be eligible under this hotspot lending program? Unfortunately, the FCC did not allow that under the hotspot program. So that was something we weren't able to, get from them, but I understand the thought here, because there are some schools I know that we've heard from that say the embedded Chromebook is such an easier solution than a hotspot. Maybe not so much for libraries. I'd be interested to know if libraries also engage in that rather than just like a hotspot, but mostly from schools we did hear, hey, this was the solution that worked for us. So unfortunately, I wish that would have been eligible, but it was not.
Thank you for that answer. And I actually think one of the people that responded, it was actually from a library that said they were checking out Chromebooks. So maybe this is something for us to keep exploring in the future. Yeah. There is another question that came up. Someone asked, are there resources for navigating E-rate funding and applying for it for the first time, like E-rate for Dummies, those yellow books?
Yes, That's so funny because somebody actually asked me this not too long ago. Just sort of where do I start? Let me find some links, Liz, and I don't know if we can send this out to people afterwards as well, if there's a
Absolutely.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, so actually, we mentioned USAC, so the third party that helps to administer the funds, and who you apply, through their portal. They actually have a really good kind of step by step on their website with all different resources. So that's really where I would start. So we can send out some links. And then, of course, there's so many people in the E-rate community who are very familiar with how the process works. And then for libraries, I believe that each state has their own state E-rate coordinator for libraries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I see that someone actually just helpfully pasted that link in the chat to find your own
Yes,
state E-rate
very
coordinator.
perfect. Yes, thank you so much, Krista. That was the next step I was going to say. Yep. So every state has their own E-rate coordinator, and I know they're extremely helpful. The ALA website may also be a good place to look, especially for state E-rate coordinator information. So lots of resources, and we can definitely point people in the right direction.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen. Okay, there's another question that came up I think this is going to be probably our last question. We don't want to keep you too long, so we'll do the raffle after this. For those who are participating in the hotspot rental or checkout program, what do you do when a hotspot goes missing? As libraries, we aren't really known to go recover lost or stolen items. Would the rental partner accept the loss and provide a new hotspot? And I will say, I do think it depends largely on your provider. I assume that you're already having a back-end access to be able to stop service to the device once it becomes overdue so that you can get it returned. But yeah, if the device ultimately goes missing, do you need to buy a new device? What's that? What kind of a situation are you in? Mark, can you speak about what that looks like
Yeah.
for you guys and any suggestions you have for if they are working with another provider?
Sure. I'll cover the kind of service provider side of it, and then there might be a couple ideas that I've read about from libraries. But on the service provider side, we sort of have three options available. The first is that we can manage it for you. So if you need to suspend a line, typically if someone is overdue on a hotspot and you suspend it, they'll eventually bring it back. It will no longer work. It becomes a brick, like Liz said, because it can't connect to the internet anymore. That doesn't always happen, but that's at least one option is to turn it off. Sometimes you can offer SMS depending on the device to say, hey, you're overdue. You need to return the device. So those are all sort of in the technology of the hotspot and the platform you use. The second option would be to work with a manufacturer. We have partnerships. We have a lot of industry experience on our team. We have partnerships with most of the hotspot manufacturers, and they offer something called MDM, mobile device management, where you have some extra features. You can stop it from doing a factory reset. You can remotely log into the device. Some of them have GPS trackers. Not that you will go hunt it down, but you could at least know, is it even in this state anymore? Or is it somewhere else? Those are typically an extra cost of something like $2 to $4 a month, but it's more tools to manage your program. It also has things like signal strength of the device, so you'll know, if people are calling in about the service, for example, hey, they might not be in an area that has a very good reception. But that's kind of option two is MDM. And then we have announced a partnership with an organization called Kajit, who's been really big in the school and library space. And well, we're currently working with them to roll out kind of an advanced account management system. It's an award-winning platform called Sentinel, and it has even more features to suspend. It has a media checkout center. It has one of the coolest features is domain by domain filtering. That's particularly interesting for schools who have different, eighth graders need certain things and 12th graders need other things. But that's kind of our good, better, best option in this space from an account management side. Now, one thing I'll mention, and Liz probably knows more about this than me, is some libraries I've seen have toyed with taking like a deposit on the device up front. That gets a little bit controversial, but I have seen folks say, hey, we take a certain dollar amount deposit just to sort of ensure that people will bring it back. But Liz, you have any other insights that you've come across on how do you get the device back?
Yeah, I've heard that as well. I've heard people playing with models around like a very small fee for use, and that's very dependent on your situation and your particular library's kind of approach to services. let's say, actually, Mark, I want to put this back to you, because let's say that we've gotten past the point of account management and it's just not coming back. You do have to get a new device so
Yeah.
that you can continue the line of service for a new patron. So Jill in the chat says, our provider will replace at no charge if we've had it for 2 years. Otherwise, we pay for the replacement.
Yeah. We are getting some requests like this and developing contracts that say we'll cover a certain number of them at no cost to the end user. To just, if you have 100 hotspots, and we'll say, hey, we'll cover, X amount of them within the period. It's they usually come back, but they don't always, right? So over time they will go away. But most of the 4G devices are pretty affordable, and we have been baking that into contracts for those who request it. So that is another option.
And that is a good idea to look for when you are looking at providers, is if that's something that they can just, offer you. I think that's a great thing to look for. Thanks everyone for joining us today. This has been a lot of fun. We appreciate your time. If you are interested in joining us for future events, check out librariesforde.org/upcoming-events. We've got office hours where you can drop in anytime to chat with us about issues you're having. We'll have more trainings coming up in the future, so check it out. If you're interested in partnering in a future event, if you've got a topic you'd like to hear about or you'd like to share about, get in touch. And depending on your Zoom client, you may get an exit survey when you leave this meeting. We would appreciate your feedback. So thanks again for joining us today, and we hope you have a fantastic rest of your afternoon.